When Anna whispered, Keanu's silence made Sandra reveal it all. The cabin lights of the plane were dim, the kind of soft glow that made every sound sharper, every glance more heavy. Outside the windows, clouds stretched endless, but inside, tension was growing. Passengers shifted uneasily, not because of turbulence, but because of what had just happened. Anna leaned forward in her seat, her voice low, almost like a secret meant only for one person. She whispered something into Keanu's ear. It was short, barely a few words, but the silence that followed made everyone notice. Keanu did not react. His face stayed calm, his hands folded neatly, his eyes fixed on the seat in front of him. He did not nod, he did not smile, he did not even blink in surprise. That silence felt louder than any reply could have been. People around sensed that something deep was hidden inside it. Sandra, sitting only a few seats away, caught the moment. She saw the way Anna's lips trembled before she pulled back, the way Keanu's stillness held weight, like he was carrying something no one else could see. Sandra's own heart began to race. She had known both of them for years, but never like this. The whispers among other passengers started soon. What did she say? Someone muttered. Why didn't he answer? Another asked. Jealousy and curiosity always found their way into human voices when mystery appeared. But Keanu gave them nothing, only silence, strong and steady, like a wall that could not be broken. And that silence pulled Sandra closer to the edge of her own thoughts. She remembered nights when Keanu had sat quietly even as the world around him fell apart. She remembered moments when silence had been his shield, his comfort, and his way of speaking without words. But this time, it was different. This time, silence was not protecting him. It was forcing her to face something she had been hiding. Anna's whisper had not just been words. Sandra could feel it. It was a confession, a truth, maybe even a plea. She looked at Keanu, her breath tight. He was giving nothing away. But his calm silence was a mirror, and in that mirror, Sandra saw herself, saw the truth she had locked away, the feelings she had buried under years of friendship and respect. Inside her, emotions clashed. She wanted to stay quiet like him, to let silence swallow everything. But another part of her, the part that had always believed in honesty, in courage, in kindness, pushed forward. The cabin air felt heavy, as if every passenger was waiting for someone to break the moment open. Then Sandra's voice, soft but steady, finally cut through the silence. "I know what she said," she whispered almost to herself. But everyone near her heard. Heads turned. Breaths held. Her eyes met Keanu's. His calm silence had given her strength, but also no place to hide. She felt exposed, fragile, yet somehow free. "She said the one thing we were both afraid to say," Sandra continued, her voice trembling but clear. The cabin froze. People leaned in. The mystery grew larger. Sandra's heart pounded as she realized she had crossed a line she could never step back from. What she had just revealed was not only about Anna or about Keanu, it was about herself. The silence broke, but not with noise. It broke with truth, and in that fragile, heavy moment, everyone understood that this was not just a story about whispers and secrets. It was about courage, humility, and the weight of carrying feelings too long. But Sandra knew this was only the beginning. The real storm was yet to come. When silence turned into questions, the air inside the plane grew tense after Sandra spoke. Her words had slipped out, but now they floated between everyone, impossible to take back. Passengers who had been dozing opened their eyes. Others stopped their quiet conversations. The hum of the engine was the only steady sound, but even that felt like a drum beating against the growing silence. Keanu sat still. His eyes did not move from Sandra's, but something in his calm face shifted. It was not anger, not fear, not even surprise. It was something deeper, something that only a few could notice. It was the kind of quiet look that said, "I already knew." Anna lowered her head. Her fingers gripped the edge of her seat, knuckles pale. She had whispered something to Keanu only minutes ago, but now it was out in the open, revealed not by her, but by Sandra. She felt exposed, maybe even betrayed, though she could not blame Sandra completely. The truth had been pressing on all of them for too long. A man sitting across the aisle leaned closer. "What did she mean?" he asked softly, almost like a child seeking answers. Others nodded, eyes wide with curiosity. Jealousy filled some voices, doubt filled others, but everyone wanted to know. Sandra's chest rose and fell as she tried to find the courage to continue. Part of her wanted to stay silent now, to step back into safety. But another part of her refused to. "She told him something she has carried for years," Sandra said slowly, her words trembling. "She told him about feelings that were never spoken, about a truth that weighed heavy." Anna's eyes lifted, shining with both fear and strength. "I did," she admitted in a soft voice that carried farther than she expected. "I told him because silence was destroying me. I told him because I thought I could not keep living with the weight of what I feel." The cabin gasped. Some passengers covered their mouths. Others whispered to each other. The moment had turned from a private secret into something shared with strangers, each of them now witnesses to a story that was unfolding in real time. Keanu stayed silent. His hands never moved, his voice never came, and yet his silence was powerful. It was like a mirror reflecting everyone's hidden truths. His calmness made people realize their own fears, their own unspoken feelings, and it frightened them. Sandra clenched her hands in her lap. She could no longer hold back. "But it is not just her truth," she said firmly, her voice stronger now. "It is mine too. For years I have watched. I have stayed quiet. I have respected the silence. But now, seeing her speak, I cannot stay silent anymore." The passengers leaned forward. Every heart seemed to beat with hers. Even the flight attendants paused in the aisle, listening. Anna turned sharply to Sandra, her voice shaking. "You too?" Sandra nodded. "Yes, me too." The cabin was no longer filled with whispers, it was filled with raw emotion. Strangers looked at each other as if they had stepped into a story larger than themselves. Respect grew in their eyes, not judgment. They saw bravery, they saw honesty, and they saw the strength it took to speak when silence had been easier. Keanu finally moved. He turned his face slowly toward the window. Outside, the clouds rolled like endless waves, untouched by the storm inside the cabin. His reflection in the glass showed a man who carried not one truth, but two, maybe more, and yet he still chose silence. That silence was not empty. It was full of weight, full of meaning, and everyone knew that when he finally spoke, if he ever did, his words would change everything. But for now, his silence left a question in every heart. What does it mean to care for two people at the same time? What does it mean to be kind when kindness itself can break someone? Sandra's heart raced. Anna's tears shimmered. The passengers held their breath, and Keanu's silence grew even louder. The weight of unspoken choices. The plane felt smaller now, as if the walls had moved closer. Every breath inside the cabin carried tension. Passengers who had been strangers an hour ago now shared the same question in their minds. What would Keanu do? Anna's whisper had started it. Sandra's confession had set it on fire. But Keanu's silence kept it alive, stretching every second like a test of patience, respect, and resilience. Sandra's hands shook. She wanted to take her words back, to undo the moment, but she knew it was too late. Her eyes searched Keanu's face for any reaction, but he gave her nothing. She had always admired his humility, his calm, but now that calm felt like a wall she could not break through. Anna leaned closer to him, her voice trembling. "You cannot stay silent forever," she whispered again. "You have to say something. Do not carry this alone." Keanu finally turned his head from the window. His gaze met hers, soft but heavy. Still, he did not speak. Instead, he placed his hand gently on the armrest between them. It was not a promise, not an answer, just a sign of quiet strength. But that silence broke something inside Sandra. "You think silence is kindness," she said sharply, her voice louder than before. "But sometimes silence is the cruelest thing you can give." The cabin went quiet again. The words cut deep, not only for Keanu but for everyone listening. The passengers shifted uncomfortably, realizing the truth in her voice. Anna's face paled. She looked at Sandra, then at Keanu, and her lips parted as if to defend him. But before she could speak, a sudden jolt shook the plane. Turbulence rattled the cabin. Overhead bins trembled. A child cried out, and the flight attendants rushed to calm the passengers. The moment of emotion turned into fear. The plane dipped slightly, the lights flickered, and gasps filled the air. Everyone gripped their seats, hearts pounding. But in that storm, Keanu finally moved. He unbuckled his seatbelt, stood slowly, and placed his hand gently on the shoulder of the frightened child 2 rows ahead. "It is all right," he said softly, his first words since the whisper. "You are safe." His voice was calm, steady, and filled with reassurance. It spread through the cabin like warmth, easing the fear of the passengers. The turbulence passed quickly, but the silence that followed was different now. Everyone realized something important. His silence had not been weakness, nor avoidance. It had been restraint. He had saved his words for the moment when they mattered most. Sandra's heart sank as she watched him comfort the child. She realized what she had said earlier might have been unfair. His silence was not cruel. It was careful. Anna looked at him with tears in her eyes. "You always know when to speak," she whispered, but Sandra still could not let go. "And what about us?" she asked, her voice breaking. "When will you speak to us?" The plane steadied, but hearts inside remained unsteady. Keanu sat back down, his silence returning. Yet this time, his eyes carried a storm, as if he knew the moment to answer was coming soon. And when it did, it would break everything open. The passengers leaned in again, waiting, wondering what truth would come next. When Sandra broke the silence, the plane had returned to calm skies, but inside the cabin the storm had only grown stronger. Passengers whispered less now. They no longer saw it as gossip. They felt they were part of something real, something fragile, something too deep to ignore. Anna sat quietly, her eyes locked on Keanu, waiting for a single word that might ease the weight inside her. Sandra, on the other hand, could not sit still. Her fingers tapped on her knee, her lips pressed tight. The silence was burning her from the inside. Finally, she stood up. The seatbelt sign was off, but no one expected her to move. Every eye followed her as she stood in the narrow aisle, her hands trembling. She looked down at Keanu, then at Anna, and her voice came out raw. "You think silence protects people?" she said, her voice cracking but loud enough for the whole cabin to hear. "But silence only leaves us drowning in questions. Anna is brave because she spoke. But me, I stayed quiet for too long. I told myself I was strong, that I respected your space, that I could live with it. But the truth is, I cannot. I am breaking." Anna's face turned pale. "Sandra, stop," she whispered. Her voice was pleading, not with anger, but with fear. Keanu looked up at her, his calm eyes steady, but even he could not stop her. Sandra's hands curled into fists at her sides. "I need everyone to hear it. I love him. I always have. I hid it because I thought kindness meant silence. I thought humility meant sacrifice. But tonight, on this plane, I cannot hide any more. If I lose respect, if I lose friends, so be it. I cannot carry this weight inside me any longer." The cabin gasped. Some passengers shook their heads, others nodded with tears in their eyes. The honesty hit them like a wave. It was not just a confession of love. It was a confession of pain, of years of unspoken feelings that had finally broken through. Anna's tears fell. She turned to Keanu, her voice shaking. "And now you see, it is not only me. She carries the same truth. So what do you choose? What do you feel? You cannot keep us in the dark forever." Keanu's silence deepened. He sat still, his hands resting on his knees, his gaze fixed on the floor. He looked like a man who carried not only their hearts, but the hearts of everyone watching. The passengers waited, breathless. They had forgotten they were on a plane, forgotten their destinations. They were caught inside this fragile story unfolding before them. Sandra wiped her eyes, her voice breaking. "Say something, Keanu, even if it hurts me. even if it hurts her. Say something, but Keanu did not yet. His silence was not empty. It was heavy, filled with conflict, filled with a storm he was not ready to release. And in that moment, Sandra realized the hardest truth of all. Sometimes silence is not an answer. It is the deepest question. Her knees weakened, and she sank back into her seat, tears streaming. The plane was quiet again, but the silence now was unbearable, like a wound left open. Anna closed her eyes, her lips trembling. The passengers looked at one another, hearts heavy with respect and sadness. And everyone knew they were moving closer to a breaking point that could not be avoided. When fear entered the cabin, the silence after Sandra's confession felt like a storm with no end. Passengers sat frozen, some with tears in their eyes, some with heavy breaths. Keanu's calm face remained still, but everyone could feel the weight pressing on him. Anna held her hands together, trembling. Sandra leaned against her seat, broken but unafraid of what she had just revealed. Then, without warning, a loud crack echoed from the back of the plane. The lights flickered once, then again. The cabin shook violently. People gasped, some screamed. A flight attendant rushed down the aisle, her face pale, her voice steady but tense. "Everyone, please remain seated. Fasten your seatbelts," she called. The plane dipped suddenly, throwing some passengers forward. Oxygen masks rattled above them but did not fall. The fear was real. Children cried, adults gripped armrests, and whispers turned into prayers. Anna grabbed Keanu's arm, her nails digging into his sleeve. "What is happening?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Keanu placed his other hand gently over hers, calm as ever. "Hold on," he said softly. His voice was like a steady flame in the middle of chaos. Sandra tightened her belt, her eyes darting around, her chest rising and falling fast. She had faced emotional storms before, but this was different. This was life or death, and suddenly, her confession seemed both smaller and larger at the same time. A man across the aisle cried out, "We are not going to make it." "Yes, we will," Keanu replied, his voice firm, louder this time. He looked at the frightened man, then at the others. "Stay calm. Trust the pilots. Fear will not help us." His words carried weight. They silenced the cabin for a moment, giving passengers something to hold on to. Even in crisis, his calmness spread like a shield. The turbulence grew worse, shaking the plane hard enough that trays fell and cups rolled. A child screamed for her mother. Keanu unbuckled his belt and rose despite the shaking. "Stay seated," a flight attendant warned, but he moved carefully to the crying child, knelt beside her, and held her hand. "Look at me," he said softly. "Breathe with me, in and out." The child followed his rhythm. Her cries slowed, her breathing steadied. Her mother wiped her tears with shaking hands, whispering thanks through sobs. Sandra watched him with her heart breaking. She saw the way his kindness touched even strangers in their worst moment. She saw the strength in his silence, the power in his rare words. And deep inside, she knew. This was the man she had fallen for. The man Anna had whispered to. The man whose silence carried more meaning than most people's speeches. The plane jolted again, harder this time. Overhead, bins burst open. A bag fell into the aisle. Panic spread like fire. Passengers cried out, some praying loudly, some clutching their loved ones. Anna covered her face with her hands, whispering, "Please, please, let us be safe." But in that chaos, Sandra's voice broke out again. "Keanu," she cried, "if this is our last night, if we do not make it, will you still stay silent?" Every head turned. Even in the storm, her words pierced through. Anna lowered her hands, eyes wide with both fear and hope. Keanu stood in the aisle, his hand still holding the child's. His eyes met Sandra's, then Anna's. His lips parted as if he might finally answer. But just then, the captain's voice came over the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing severe turbulence. Please stay calm. We will guide the plane to stable air soon." The moment passed, swallowed by the sound of the captain's voice and the roar of the engines. Keanu's words once again remained unspoken, and yet His silence was not empty. It was full of something bigger, something that promised he could not stay silent forever. When Keanu finally spoke, the turbulence slowly faded. The cabin steadied and the crying softened. But the storm inside the passengers' hearts did not calm. Eyes stayed fixed on Keanu, waiting for him to break the silence that had held them all captive. Anna leaned forward, her hands clasped together so tightly they turned pale. Her whisper trembled as it slipped out. "Please, say something." Sandra's eyes were wet, but her voice was stronger. "We deserve the truth. Not tomorrow, not later. Now." The plane felt frozen, as if the engines themselves were waiting. Keanu looked around. His eyes moved over the passengers who had been pulled into their story, strangers now bound together by shared fear and curiosity. Then his gaze returned to Anna, then to Sandra. His lips parted, and for the first time since the turbulence, his voice filled the air. "You both think silence is me avoiding the truth," he said calmly. "But silence is where I listen. Silence is where I weigh every word because once spoken, words cannot be taken back." The cabin leaned in. No one dared to breathe too loudly. "Anna," he continued softly, "your whisper was not new to me. I have felt it in your eyes for years. Your truth has always been close, even when you did not speak it." Anna's tears spilled. She bit her lip to hold back a sob, her body trembling from both fear and relief. Then he turned to Sandra. "And you," he said, his voice steady. "Your courage tonight is something I will never forget. You carried your silence longer than anyone should. Your pain, your strength, your honesty, they are more powerful than you know." Sandra's chest rose sharply. Her lips trembled, her heart breaking open in front of everyone. Keanu paused. His silence returned for a moment, but it was no longer the silence of distance. It was the silence of choosing. And then he said something no one expected. "I cannot choose between you," he said quietly. "Not because I do not care, but because caring is not about choosing who to hurt. Both of you matter. Both of you have shown me respect, humility, and love. If I speak one answer now, I destroy the other. And that is not kindness. That is cruelty." Gasps spread across the cabin. Some passengers shook their heads, others nodded slowly with respect. The weight of his words settled like a stone in everyone's heart. Anna's voice cracked. "Then what do we do?" Keanu leaned back in his seat, his face calm but heavy. "We learn to live with truth. We learn that silence is not always weakness, that sometimes the kindest act is not to choose, but to carry the pain with dignity. I will not give either of you false promises. I will give you honesty. And tonight, honesty means this. I care for you both, but I will not break one heart to comfort another." The cabin fell silent again, but it was a different silence. This time it was filled with respect. Passengers looked at him not as a man caught in a love triangle, but as someone who carried kindness in the hardest way possible. Anna closed her eyes, whispering through her tears. "How do we live with that?" Sandra's head lowered, her shoulders shaking. But deep inside, even through the pain, she felt a strange peace. She had wanted words, and now she had them. Not the words she dreamed of, but words that held truth. And sometimes truth, even painful truth, was better than silence. But the story was not over. Because as the plane moved closer to its destination, no one knew what would happen when they landed, when silence would no longer protect them, and the world outside would demand more answers. When silence turned into strength, the cabin slowly returned to calm. The turbulence was gone, but the weight of Keanu's words lingered in the air. No one spoke for a long time. People stared out the windows, some pretending to read, but everyone was listening to the silence, a silence that now felt different, no longer empty, but full of meaning. Anna sat with her hands folded, her eyes red from tears. She leaned back against her seat, her body tired, but her heart even more so. She had spoken her truth, and now she carried both relief and sorrow together. Sandra sat quietly too. Her bold confession had changed everything. And now she felt both lighter and heavier at the same time. Lighter, because the truth was no longer locked inside her. Heavier, because she now had to live with the reality of Keanu's words. Keanu sat between them, his posture calm, his eyes soft. His silence was no longer running from the truth. It was holding it, protecting it, carrying it for all three of them. Then, as if fate had planned it, the captain's voice came on. "Ladies and gentlemen, we will begin our descent shortly. Please prepare for landing." The cabin stirred, seatbelts clicked, but the story inside that plane was not finished. "Not yet." Aina turned to Sandra, her voice weak but sincere. "I do not hate you," she whispered. "Maybe once I might have, but not now. Tonight showed me something bigger. Love is not war, and you are not my enemy. You are like me, someone who cared in silence for too long." Sandra's lips trembled. She reached for Anna's hand, hesitating, then took it. "I never wanted to fight you. I only wanted to be honest. Maybe pain is easier to carry when it is shared." The two women, once standing on opposite sides of an invisible wall, now held each other's hands with quiet strength. Passengers who watched wiped their eyes. The kindness between them was more powerful than any answer Keanu could have given. Keanu looked at them both, his face calm, his heart heavy. "This is what respect looks like," he said softly. "This is what resilience means. To stand in truth, to feel pain, and still choose kindness." The plane touched down, wheels hitting the runway with a shudder, the cabin filled with the sound of applause, not for the landing, but for the unspoken courage that had filled the night. As passengers stood to gather their things, many stopped to look at the three of them. One woman whispered, "I will never forget what I saw tonight." Another man said quietly, "Your silence taught me more than words ever could." Sandra smiled faintly through her tears. Anna nodded with quiet strength. Keanu remained calm, his silence now no longer heavy but peaceful. As they stepped off the plane together, the night air met them with cool softness. The world outside was still the same, but they were not. Each carried truth, pain, and strength, but also respect for one another, and sometimes that was enough. The story that began with a whisper ended not with an answer, but with something greater: humility, kindness, and the courage to face tomorrow with dignity.